The wind that sweeps across the Peak District in northern England is relentless. It carves through the valleys and whips over the high, desolate plateaus known as the moors. To the casual observer, Saddleworth Moor is a place of rugged, stark beauty, a vast expanse of peat and heather that changes color with the seasons. It is a place of silence, where the only sounds are the crying of curlews and the rustling of the wind through the grass. But for the people of Manchester, and indeed for the entire United Kingdom, this landscape holds a different meaning. It is a geography of grief, a silent witness to one of the most profound tragedies in British criminal history. To understand the weight of the Moors murders, one must first understand the time and place in which they occurred. The early 1960s in Manchester was a period of transition. The city was the industrial heart of the North, a place of red brick terraced houses, smoking chimneys, and tight-knit communities. It was an era where neighbors knew one another, where doors were often left unlocked, and where children played in the streets from dawn until dusk. There was an inherent trust in the social fabric, a belief that the community would look out for its own. This sense of security was shattered not by a foreign threat or a natural disaster, but by the calculated malevolence of two individuals living among them. Between July 1963 and October 1965, 5 children vanished. Their names were Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey, and Edward Evans. For a long time, these disappearances were viewed as isolated incidents, tragic but unconnected mysteries that baffled the local constabulary. Policing in the 1960s was a world away from the forensic capabilities of the modern era. There was no DNA profiling, no CCTV networks, no digital databases to track the movement of vehicles or individuals. Investigations relied heavily on footwork, witness statements, and the intuition of detectives who were often overworked and under-resourced. When a child went missing, the initial assumption was often that they had run away or had fallen victim to an accident. The idea that a pair of serial predators was operating in the area was almost inconceivable. The first to vanish was Pauline Reed. At 16 years old, she was on the cusp of adulthood, a young woman with a love for pop music and fashion. On the 12th of July, 1963, she disappeared while on her way to a dance at a local railway club. She was wearing a coat over a dress, preparing for an evening of joy that would never happen. Her disappearance left a void in her family that would never be filled. The police search was extensive, but it yielded nothing. In the crowded streets of Gorton, a suburb of Manchester, she had simply stepped into the evening and was gone. 4 months later, in November 1963, 12-year-old John Kilbride went to the cinema with a friend. After the movie, they parted ways at a bus stop. The fog was thick that night, a common occurrence in industrial Manchester, cloaking the streets in a gray haze. John never made it home. His family, frantic with worry, launched their own searches, scouring the neighborhood and pleading for information. The police treated it as a missing person case. But as the weeks turned into months, the hope of finding him alive began to fade. The pattern continued into 1964. Keith Bennett, a bespectacled 12-year-old with a gentle nature, disappeared on June 16 while walking to his grandmother's house. He was a boy who knew the rules of safety, who was loved deeply by his mother, Winnie Johnson. His disappearance was particularly baffling because the walk was short and familiar. Then, on Boxing Day of 1964, 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey vanished from a fairground near her home. She had gone to enjoy the lights and the rides, a festive treat that ended in silence. The police were struggling. The disappearances were geographically close, yet there was no physical evidence linking them. No weapon had been found. No credible witnesses had come forward to describe an abduction, and no bodies had been discovered. The parents of the missing children were left in a state of agonizing limbo. They formed a tragic sorority of grief, their lives suspended in time, waiting for answers that seemed impossible to find. The breakthrough, when it finally came, did not originate from a detective's hunch or a forensic discovery, but from within the perpetrator's own circle. The unraveling of the case began in October 1965 with the murder of 17-year-old Edward Evans. Unlike the previous victims, Edward was not a child snatched from the street, but a young man lured into a trap. On the night of the 6th of October 1965, a man named David Smith witnessed the aftermath of Edward Evans's murder. Smith was married to the sister of Myra Hindley, one of the two perpetrators. He had been groomed by Brady, Hindley's partner, who sought to impress Smith with his nihilistic philosophy and capacity for violence. Brady wanted an audience, a disciple to validate his warped worldview. However, the reality of violence, the stark and brutal finality of taking a life, terrified David Smith. Upon witnessing the crime at the couple's home on Wardlebrook Avenue, Smith feigned compliance to ensure his own safety, terrified that he would be next. The moment he was able to leave the house, Smith made a decision that would change the course of history. He did not run into hiding. He went to the police. In the early hours of the morning, a call box in Manchester became the lifeline for justice. Smith, shaking and terrified, recounted what he had seen to the officers. He told them of a body in the house, of an axe, and of the cold, calculated demeanor of Brady and Myra Hindley. The police response was immediate. Officers arrived at 16 Wardlebrook Avenue, a seemingly ordinary council house on a quiet estate. To the neighbors, Brady was a stock clerk and Hindley a typist. They were an aloof couple, perhaps a bit odd, but certainly not suspected of harboring such darkness. When the police knocked, they were met with resistance, but they gained entry. In the upstairs bedroom, they found the body of Edward Evans. Brady was arrested on suspicion of murder. Myra Hindley was initially brought in for questioning as an accessory. At this point, the police believed they were dealing with a single, horrific domestic homicide. They had no idea that they had just apprehended two of the most prolific child killers in British history. The investigation that followed was a masterclass in methodical police work. Detective Superintendent Bob Tyrrell led the inquiry. He sensed that there was more to this couple than a single impulsive act. The house was sealed off and subjected to a forensic search of unprecedented detail for the time. Every item, every scrap of paper, was catalogued and analyzed. It was during this search that the police found the evidence that would blow the case wide open. Hidden within the spine of a prayer book, they found a deposit ticket for a left luggage locker at Manchester Central Station. This small slip of paper was the key to Pandora's box. Detectives retrieved the suitcases associated with the ticket. Inside, they found a collection of items that painted a disturbing picture of the couple's private life. There were books on Nazi ideology, whips, and pornography, but more chillingly, there were photographs and tape recordings. The photographs showed the couple posing on Saddleworth Moor. Other photos, which were never released to the public due to their sensitive nature. The realization hit the investigation team with the force of a physical blow. The little girl, who had vanished from the fairground the previous Christmas, had been in the clutches of Brady and Hindley. The tape recordings confirmed it. They captured the voice of Leslie Ann Downey, distressed and pleading to go home. It was a piece of audio evidence so harrowing that seasoned detectives were reduced to tears, and later, jurors would be visibly shaken. The connection was made. The police now knew that Brady and Hindley were responsible for the death of Edward Evans and Leslie Ann Downey. But what of the others? The photographs of the couple posing on the moors seemed to hold a significance beyond mere scenery. They were not casual snapshots. They were trophies. The landscapes in the background were distinct. The investigation shifted from the claustrophobic interior of the house on Wardlebrook Avenue to the vast, open expanse of Saddleworth Moor. It was a logistical nightmare. The moors are huge, covering thousands of acres of peat, which is acidic and preserves organic matter, but also shifts and changes over time. Searching for clandestine graves in such terrain was like looking for a needle in a haystack, where the haystack itself is constantly moving. Hundreds of police officers were deployed. They formed long lines, walking shoulder to shoulder, probing the ground with long metal rods. It was grueling, back-breaking work performed in often freezing rain and biting winds. They were looking for soft spots in the peat, disturbances that might indicate a burial. On the 16th of October 1965, their persistence paid off. A body was discovered. It was Leslie Ann Downey. She had been buried in a shallow grave, naked, her clothes found nearby. The discovery confirmed the worst fears of the community. The search intensified. 5 days later, on October 21, another body was found. It was John Kilbride. He had been missing for 2 years. The positioning of the graves corresponded with the locations where Brady and Hindley had photographed each other. The moors, previously just a scenic backdrop to Manchester life, had been revealed as a graveyard. The forensic pathology involved in the case was cutting edge for its time. Identifying the remains after such a long period required meticulous work. Dental records, clothing fragments, and anatomical anomalies were cross-referenced with missing persons files. The confirmation of John Kilbride's identity linked the couple to a crime dating back to 1963, establishing a pattern of serial murder. Brady and Myra Hindley were charged with the murders of Edward Evans, Leslie Ann Downey, and John Kilbride. The trial began in April 1966 at Chester Assizes. It was one of the most publicized legal events of the 20th century. The security was incredibly tight, as the public outrage was palpable. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, and the police had to protect the vehicle carrying the accused from being mobbed. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric with tension. The prosecution, led by the Attorney General, laid out the case with clinical precision. They presented the left luggage evidence, the photographs, and the testimony of David Smith. But the most powerful evidence was the tape recording. When it was played in court, the silence was absolute. The voices on the tape, the cold, commanding tones of Brady and Hindley, contrasted with the terrified pleas of the child, removed any doubt about the nature of the defendants. Brady and Hindley pleaded not guilty. Brady remained arrogant and aloof, seemingly enjoying the notoriety. Hindley appeared impassive, her bleached blonde hair and hard expression becoming the defining image of the trial. They offered no defense that could withstand the mountain of forensic and circumstantial evidence stacked against them. The defense tried to argue that Smith was the primary aggressor or that the evidence was circumstantial, but the jury was not swayed. After a trial lasting 2 weeks, the jury returned their verdicts. Brady was found guilty of all 3 murders. Myra Hindley was found guilty of the murders of Leslie Ann Downey and Edward Evans, and of being an accessory to the murder of John Kilbride. The sentence was mandatory. Just months prior, the Murder Act, 1965, had suspended capital punishment in Great Britain. Had the trial taken place a year earlier, both might have faced the gallows. Instead, the judge passed the only sentence available: life imprisonment. In his closing remarks, the judge described the crimes as wicked beyond belief, a phrase that would stick to the perpetrators for the rest of their lives. However, the story did not end with the slamming of the prison cell doors. There were still 2 missing children, Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett. The police strongly suspected Brady and Hindley were responsible, but without bodies or a confession, they could not prosecute. For the families of Pauline and Keith, the verdict brought no closure, only a continuation of their agonizing wait. For 20 years, the killers maintained their silence regarding the other 2 victims. It was a final act of control, a way to hold power over the families and the authorities, even from behind bars. It wasn't until the mid-1980s, following persistent reporting by journalists and renewed pressure from the police, that the wall of silence began to crack. In 1985, hoping to improve their conditions, or perhaps realizing that their secrets no longer held the same currency, Brady and Hindley confessed to the murders of Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett. This confession reignited the investigation. Greater Manchester Police formed a new task force to return to Saddleworth Moor. This time, the search was aided by the perpetrators themselves. Under heavy police guard, first Hindley and later Brady were taken back to the moors to help identify the burial sites. It was a surreal and macabre spectacle, the aging killers walking through the heather, trying to recall landmarks from 20 years prior. The landscape had changed. Erosion and vegetation growth had altered the terrain. Despite the difficulties, the renewed search yielded a result. On the 1st of July 1987, the search team discovered the remains of Pauline Reed. She was found still wearing the dress and coat she had put on for the dance in 1963. For her family, it was a moment of devastating relief. They could finally bring her home and lay her to rest with dignity. But for Winnie Johnson, the mother of Keith Bennett, the search ended in heartbreak. Despite the presence of the killers and the use of modern ground-penetrating radar and aerial photography, Keith's remains were not located. Brady claimed he could not remember the exact spot, or perhaps he was playing one final, cruel game. The search was eventually called off, though sporadic efforts would continue for decades. The legacy of the Moors murders is profound and multifaceted. From a criminological perspective, it marked a turning point in how missing children cases were handled in the UK. The stranger danger campaigns of the 1970s and 80s were driven in part by the cultural trauma of these crimes. The case also highlighted the importance of cross-referencing police data. The failure to connect the disappearances earlier was a result of the fragmented nature of policing at the time, leading to the development of national databases and better communication between districts. Forensically, the case demonstrated the vital importance of environmental evidence. The work done on the moors, analyzing soil samples, vegetation, and the preservation properties of peat paved the way for forensic ecology, a field that helps locate clandestine graves based on changes in the landscape. But the true legacy lies in the impact on the community and the families. The mothers of the victims, particularly Ann West and Winnie Johnson, became fierce campaigners. They fought to ensure that Brady and Hindley remained in prison for the rest of their lives. Their tenacity ensured that every time the possibility of parole was whispered, the public outcry was deafening. Both perpetrators died in custody. Hindley in 2002 and Brady in 2017. Winnie Johnson passed away in 2012, never having found her son. Her strength and dignity in the face of unimaginable suffering made her a national figure of resilience. She kept Keith's glasses case, the only physical memento she had of his last walk, until the day she died. The Moors murders remain a scar on the psyche of the nation, not just because of the brutality of the crimes, but because of the betrayal of innocence. These were crimes committed against children, in a community that prided itself on safety and trust. The perpetrators were not monsters from a fairy tale, but ordinary-looking people who walked the same streets and shopped in the same stores. As we look back on this case, the focus should not be on the psychology of the killers, which has been analyzed endlessly, but on the enduring memory of the victims. Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey, and Edward Evans. Their lives were cut short, but their names are etched into history, reminding us of the fragility of life and the necessity of justice. Today, Saddleworth Moor remains silent. The wind still blows over the heather, and the seasons still change the color of the peat. It is a place of natural beauty, but for those who know the history, it is hallowed ground. It serves as a somber reminder of the darkness that can exist within the human heart, and the tireless light of those who seek the truth. In the end, the resolution of criminal cases is not just about the gavel coming down or the prison door locking. It is about the restoration of order and the acknowledgement of truth. While the legal case is closed, the moral questions it raised endure. In a world where safety can feel fleeting, we are left to ask ourselves, how do we protect the most vulnerable among us? And how do we ensure that when the worst happens, we have the resolve to seek justice, no matter how long it takes?